Now let's discuss the Middle East crisis. The Israeli government on Wednesday, I beg to say, the Israeli Defense Force IDF hit on the Syrian Ministry of Defense, and there are reports that 3 people were killed. It's not only this, Lebanon also has found its way into the conflict, the recent one, and we want to seek further clarifications as to what's happening there. This morning, we're being joined by Israeli affairs expert Eylon Levy. We thank you indeed, Eylon, for joining us on News Hub on Silverbird Television today. Hello, Eylon, can you hear me? I'd like for you to unmute your device so that we can hear you, because we can't now.
Works better?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, Eylon, once again, you're welcome onto the program today.
Glad to be here, thank you.
All right, so many issues that Israel has to contend with since 2023. In fact, to be precise, October 7 till now. It's been from one conflict to another. Tell us more about this one with Syria.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The October 7th massacre, when Hamas invaded and brutally massacred 1,200 Israelis, wasn't just a terror attack. It was the opening shot of a regional war against Israel, a war in which Israel has been fighting on 7 fronts. And one of the most interesting developments has been Syria, because Israel's defeat of Hezbollah, Iran's proxy army in Lebanon, led to the fall of the Assad regime. And who took over? HTS, which is an Al-Qaeda spin-off. The president of Syria now, al-Jolani, was on America's most wanted list until he became president, and then trimmed his beard and put on a suit, but he is still a former member of a jihadist group. And Israel is now worried that the Syrian regime is attacking the Druze minority in Syria. The Druze are a special religious minority. They are not Muslims, and they have been targeted by political and religious violence by the regime and by its supporters. And we've seen horrific atrocities being perpetrated against members of this vulnerable Druze minority in southern Syria. And Israel is now taking urgent action to protect them and to keep them safe.
Many would ask, why is Israel taking the place of a big brother in some other countries' affairs? Help us understand why Israel is doing that.
Because Israel is a Jewish state with a big Druze minority. And the Druze in Israel are well-integrated, loyal citizens who serve in the army, in parliament, in the police force, and they're begging the country to take action. They have family in Syria. They're watching these images on social media. They fear that their families are being targeted for extermination, and they're begging Israel, do something. That's where the pressure is coming from the Druze inside Israel. They've declared a general strike, protesting on the border. The day before yesterday, over 1,000 young Druze men inside Israel broke through the border, and many are still there in Syria, where they've gone themselves to protect their fellow countrymen. They're telling Israel, we have always been loyal to this country, we have helped to protect it, and we want you now to help protect our families across the border.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's very open that the Druze really, they occupy the Golan Heights, which Israel occupies at the moment. But some would still argue that regardless, they are an integral part of the Syrian government, so to speak, the Syrian nation, better put, and that Israel should really tread softly unless this would escalate, which is what people in the Middle East are very afraid of. How do you respond to that?
Well, the Druze inside Syria don't trust the new government, because the new government is headed by someone who used to be an Al-Qaeda militant. They're suspicious, and Israel is suspicious, that just because he trimmed his beard and put on a suit, it doesn't mean that he's moderated. And he wants to bring the Druze parts of southern Syria under regime control, which would make them vulnerable. So I think both the Druze in southern Syria and Israel have a common interest that the regime should not be able to have soldiers in these areas because it would endanger the Druze and it would endanger Israel as well. And Israel is now pushing for a peace deal with Syria, hoping that Syria will normalize ties with Israel, but that has to be based on mutual security and respect for minority groups as well.
You know, Eylon, I'm asking this question again because, I mean, a lot of people also desire to understand how it's moving. The Syrian government sees Druze as a militia body, which goes to say that they have their own kind of, workings that could be very dangerous to the administration in place at the moment, and so they have to deal with it. In fact, I heard one of the Syrian officials saying that the Israeli government would not allow within its own territory a sect like Druze to operate within. In what ways do you think that Israel can really navigate through these operations to rather push for peace than to escalate the situation as it's been viewed?
Yeah, it's very important that in the wake of the October 7th war and the Syrian civil war, we get regional stability, which is what the area really needs. Syria is still fractured between different militias after the civil war, and what the new government now, headed by a former Al-Qaeda militant, is trying to do is to impose its control in the country, and not all the minority groups accept that. They don't trust it. They see the violence that the regime and its forces have perpetrated against innocent Druze in the past few days, and they're scared of what will happen if the Syrian government has full control in the region. Israel wants to create a buffer zone. The lesson that Israel drew from October 7th, when Hamas surprised us with an armed invasion of terrorists who brutally massacred 1,200 people and took 250 hostages, 50 of whom are still there. The lesson Israel drew is that we cannot have hostile forces on our borders, because that's a recipe for war. They will surprise us and there will be another attack. And in order to keep Israel safe, and in order to keep the Middle East stable, you have to keep threats away from Israel's borders. So Israel will be is insisting that southern Syria be demilitarized. Respect Syria, respect Syria's sovereignty, but says the Syrian regime headed by a former Al-Qaeda militant cannot put his own soldiers right on Israel's border, because that's not a recipe for peace, that's a recipe for regional instability.
Many would argue with you that, Syria is a sovereign nation, and Israel invading, I'll use the word invade, or trying to, in their own way, trying to institute a level of peace, is also a breach on the sovereignty of Syria. Shouldn't there have been better ways, negotiations, or regime change moves by the Israeli government as against bombing the Syrian forces?
Well, I don't think Israel is going to perform regime change in Syria, and certainly that would not be consistent with Syria's sovereignty. But sovereignty does not include the right to target vulnerable minority groups. Human rights observers on the ground are reporting extrajudicial executions of Druze civilians in Suwaida. We've seen horrific images of elderly men having their mustaches shaved off by Islamist militias, and we all know what these scenes can lead to. So Israel isn't looking to undermine Syria's sovereignty. It's looking to protect a vulnerable, persecuted minority that is facing religious violence, and responding to a demand from Druze citizens inside Israel who are begging for someone to protect the Druze inside Syria. Because if Israel won't do it, no one will protect them, and they'll be vulnerable to more Islamist attacks.
I'm also curious about the involvement of Lebanon in all of this, because, of course, the Israeli forces, according to reports, hit on the Bekaa Valley. How did Lebanon come into the triangle at this point?
Well, Lebanon entered the October 7th war the day after Hamas's attack. Hamas attacked on October 7th, and then Hezbollah, Iran's proxy army in Lebanon, a terrorist group with over 150,000 rockets, also declared war on Israel. They fired missiles at Israel. They forced tens of thousands of Israelis to flee their homes. And in an amazing military campaign, Israel has cut Hezbollah down to size, down to a point that the Lebanese government is now able to take back control of its country and reassert Lebanese sovereignty over Lebanon in areas that were occupied by this Iranian-backed terrorist group. But Hezbollah is refusing to lay down its arms as the ceasefire requires. It's trying to build up its military strength, build back its drones and its missiles and its armed forces. And Israel is insisting the terrorist group that fired so many missiles at Israel, that wanted to invade Israel, it cannot be allowed to terrorize Israelis or Lebanese anymore. Israel is knocking Hezbollah down to size and giving the Lebanese people the first opportunity in a generation to take their country back and lead the region to a better future of peace.
Many would ask that, or rather would say that Israel seemed to have their hands on a number of conflicts within the Middle East. And logically, people would say that to a large extent, Israel should be weakened at the moment. You're still grappling with the conflict with Hamas in the Gaza region. A couple of months ago, there were exchanges with Iran. And here we are now with Syria and Lebanon. Isn't Israel having its hand on too many conflicts at a time?
Yes, Israel did not ask to be attacked on 7 fronts, but since October 7th, Israel's enemies have been attacking Israel on 7 fronts. Israel didn't want Hamas to invade on October 7th. It didn't want Hezbollah in the north to rain rockets from Lebanon. And we don't want the Houthis in Yemen to keep firing ballistic missiles at Israel like they did just yesterday. Israel wants to live in peace and security within its borders. But the root cause of the conflict in the Middle East is that Israel is surrounded by terrorist groups that don't recognize Israel, that don't accept Israel, that don't want Israel to exist, that think that in a region of Arab and Muslim states, there's no room for one small Jewish and democratic state. And so Israel is fighting for its life. Israel is fighting for its people's lives to restore security to the Middle East. And I hope that the October 7th war ends with an outbreak of peace in the region. This is what all world leaders need to demand now. The time of conflict in the Middle East is over. The Arab world needs to accept that Israel isn't going anywhere. Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, they all have to make peace with Israel, and everyone has to work together to contain the Iranian regime's aggression, to stop it filling the region with more proxy armies, and definitely to stop it trying to rebuild its nuclear weapons program, because that would be a threat to the entire region.
Eylon, easily, I mean, mentioning Saudi Arabia easily brings to mind the Arab League and what they really have stood for in terms of their relations with Israel within the Middle East space. But if you look at all the issues that you have on ground right now in Israel, what do you see to be the way forward? I know that many people are asking Israel, how do you even cope in the midst of all of the crisis? How do you even really are able to continue to hold on to all the conflicts within? Are there considerations by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to see if indeed peace could come earlier than many people fear it wouldn't?
Absolutely. Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the cusp of a normalization deal before the October 7th massacre. That's why Hamas did it when it did it. It wanted to stop peace in the Middle East and frustrate it by launching a regional war. But those talks are back on track now. And Israel wants Saudi Arabia to normalize relations, make peace with Israel, and we can treat each other as normal countries and as normal neighbors. And I think that what we saw in the 12 days of war with Iran, when Israel stood up and took action at the last minute to prevent the Iranian regime from getting nuclear weapons, it's proven its value as a strong ally in the region. And I hope that Arab leaders across the region are looking at Israel and say, it's crazy that we don't have relations with Israel. It's crazy that we don't recognize Israel. Now is the time for peace with Israel. And I think President Trump, who really wants that Nobel Peace Prize, is pushing in that direction. He wants it to be his legacy. Netanyahu wants it to be his legacy. And hopefully, if Hamas accepts a ceasefire now in Gaza, and we can get back at least half of the hostages and open space for negotiations that will end the war with Hamas leaving power, that will also create the space for diplomacy for broader regional normalization.
All right, Eylon, we have to let you go right about now. However, what is the U.S. saying about the current attack on the Syrian forces by Israel? Have you heard the U.S. perspective to that incident?
I've seen news reports that the United States wants a de-escalation. I think that's sensible. We don't want a war with Syria. We don't want an escalation, but we need to make sure that the Druze minority in Syria are protected. And it's important that the situation calm down and that the Druze citizens in Syria be protected and that the Islamist forces that have been targeting them stay well away.
All right, well, thank you indeed, Eylon, for really joining us on the show today. Eylon,
my pleasure, anytime.
All right, thank you so much. Eylon Levy is an Israeli spokesperson, and it's always nice to have him on the show today. All eyes on how Israel will be able to navigate through the Middle East crisis, which seems to be coming from all fronts at this point in time. I mean, from the within, we're very close to it, from Gaza to Lebanon back there, and to Iran back now to Syria, Syria now back to Lebanon. I don't know how all of this will keep going around.
Yemen is also in the
Yemen
picture.
Yemen is, of course, all the time.
Well, he did say that he didn't ask them to wage war against them, that they have to defend themselves. I'm sure everybody will want to defend themselves if faced with such level of conflict. Well, we need to go on a break.